What's up everybody, Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Overwatch video. And in this video we gotta break down why you are dying so much in Overwatch, and it's because of your positioning. Now, this is the one pillar of improvement that many people do not know how to improve on. So I'm gonna be giving you some actionable tips and rules to follow so that you can have one of the best positioning out of anyone in your rank, and as such you're gonna be dying less, being more effective, and it's gonna be really easy for you to climb, and this could even be the one thing that is holding you back from ranking up. So let's break it all down, but go to the GameLeap website in the links down below for in-depth advanced VOD reviews over every single hero. So if you are playing a hero or a main that doesn't get a lot of love, you will find in-depth guides on the GameLeap website, so go check it out in the links down below. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. So essentially, one of the biggest problems for players in lower ranks is that they, one, die way too much, and two, they are far more ineffective at their job than they should be. And it's not because of their mechanics or their decision making, it's because they are not in the appropriate positions to make their job easier to accomplish. Now, while I can't show you exactly where to position every single time because positioning is subjective, which is really important, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, let's first give you some grounded ideas about what is the focal point around positioning in general, and it has to do with cover. Now, there are two types of cover. There is natural cover and there is artificial cover. Now, let's talk about them separately so you really understand what are the strengths and weaknesses of both. First, artificial cover. This is more akin to something like a Reinhardt shield. Now, there are strengths and weaknesses to a cover like this. Let's talk about the strengths first. The strengths are you can shoot through it and the enemy can't shoot back through you. So, if you're McCree standing on the point with a full shielded Reinhardt, you can shoot the enemy and they can't shoot you back for as long as that shield remains up, which means it's going to be very easy for you to clean up that point unless the enemy has some sort of artificial cover themselves, or they have characters that can push through the artificial cover and still be effective even in the face of it, you know, something like Doomfist or a dive composition, for example. Now, that being said, even though you think, hey, artificial cover seems really powerful because, of course, you can't shoot through natural cover, there are some big weaknesses to artificial cover. The first one being the fact that it can come down at any moment. Not just because it can actually get broken and then you're stranded in the middle of the open without any cover, but your Reinhardt or whoever could just drop their artificial cover whenever they deem it's best, and you could get hooked, you could get shot, expecting yourself to be safe behind this cover, but it just disappears at a moment's notice. Now let's directly compare this to natural cover, which, yes, doesn't give you the same strengths that you get with artificial cover because you can shoot through artificial cover when the enemies can't, but it also is very, very reliable in the fact that it can't break and it's not going to disappear at a moment's notice. So while, yes, it is the less powerful option, it is far more consistent and reliable, which is why it is the building block for all good positions. While, yes, you do have a strong position, being behind your Ryan when he has a full shield, that is strong. You can replicate something even safer, a bet not as powerful, by just standing near some wall or some cover that if enemies want to push up on you, or you are reloading, or you want to hide from enemies, you can easily just leave their LOS and they can't do any damage to you. Now, I've used this analogy before, but to best describe how natural cover should be used, imagine that at any moment some McCree could high noon in the middle of the map and you could not kill him. Can you get behind cover in time for that high noon not to kill you? If the answer is yes, your position is probably pretty decent, and if your answer is no, you need to fix your positioning right away, because you should always be able to quickly hide behind some sort of natural cover if you ever become under fire at any moment, because that happens a lot in Overwatch. Now, next tip comes directly from the Star Wars universe, and just like in the movies, the high ground is incredibly powerful, and it's not just in the movies. In real life, the high ground is powerful in the same way, but specifically in Overwatch, the high ground is something that you should constantly be fighting for, positioning to, and the reasons are plentiful. So first off, it's just a form of natural cover. If someone's underneath you on the low ground and you back up from the high ground, you basically get to hide whenever you want to, but if they're on the low ground, they don't necessarily have the same option, and you get a vantage point on them, not only for information's sake, but just seeing them a lot easier, and it's a lot harder for them to hide from your source of damage. On top of that, because there's no fall damage, let's say you're ever in a situation like you're a McCree up against a McCree, but you're on the high ground and the McCree's on the low ground. Now, if you're standing on that high ground and you get that McCree weak and he hides behind some sort of small cover or small barrier or whatever, you can literally jump off the high ground, chase him down as a form of pursuit, and you can go and finish him off. But if you're on that low ground and he's on that high ground, if he backs up, you can't possibly pursue him out of nowhere. You do not have any way to scale that verticality at a moment's notice, and that is another way that the high ground is powerful and the low ground is automatically going to be weaker. So now that we broke down the difference in natural versus artificial cover, why there should be a priority in positioning yourself near natural cover, and the reasons to fight for the high ground, let's talk about positioning strength as a whole, because as I mentioned before, it's something that is always changing. Now, the first thing that you need to be thinking about, where if you're standing in a position, some positions can be stronger or weaker depending on a number of factors that happen on the game state. First off is heals. For instance, if there's a mini or a mega nearby you, your position automatically becomes slightly stronger because you could always kite to there if you get pursued, and you have a form of sustain that is independent from anyone else on the map. Now, on top of that, you could think about your team's heals. For instance, if you have a healer on your team that is an LOS of you, your position automatically becomes stronger, and that is why what healers your teams are playing and being in their LOS so that they can effectively heal you, those are things that are very important and can automatically increase your position and strength. And on top of that, the same thing is true for just getting peel. Like if you are a support, being conjoined at the hip with your McCree automatically increases the power of your position as opposed to being across the map from him. So you just need to understand that the relative position and abilities of your team can also make your individual position stronger or weaker. And then the other thing you need to keep in mind is the enemy heroes and locations. Certain positioning is going to be weaker or stronger depending on what the enemy team is playing. For instance, if you're playing alone on the high ground, but the enemy is running D.Va, Winston, Genji, yeah, that is a much weaker position than if the enemy team is playing something like McCree, something like Ryan and Zarya, characters that cannot transfer to the high ground out of nowhere, and as such, they would have to literally route to the high ground as an entire team to come contest you, which not all teams are going to do, and if they do, you're going to have enough time to reposition. Now, that doesn't mean you can never position on the high ground if the enemy team is playing dive or something like that, but you need to keep in mind where they are located and are they in a position to set up to engage onto you, and if that's true, you need to either back up on that high ground or reposition as a whole. Maybe it's better to play with your team because that is positionally stronger than fighting for a high ground where your team can't help you and you need to be within their range of effective help. Now, as a general rule, the higher impact that you can have at your current location and the difficulty to kill combined is how strong your position is. Like, sure, you could be across the map away from all enemies, surrounded by 4 walls, and you're going to be the safest person in the world, but can you be effective in any way? No, so that's not a good positioning. Now, in order to play in that sweet spot where you're very high impact and very hard to kill, you want to perfectly master the effective range for your character. And let's talk about DPS for a second. If you're a character like Widowmaker, being far outside of the enemy's effective range, but in yours, can make you not only effective, but also hard to kill, and perfectly balancing the spacing between your effective range and away from that enemy's effective range can make it so both of those boxes are still perfectly checked. Now, something that's really important is you can give up your hard to kill aspect of your positioning for a high impact play if your play is on a cooldown, but then you quickly go back to a more passive role or a more passive position. For instance, momentarily you can give up a good hard to kill position for a high impact nade play on Ana, but you got to understand that you are uniquely vulnerable in that time frame. But if you minimize that by doing it at a time when enemies are not aware of you, or you're doing it so quickly for such a small period of time that enemies would have a hard time punishing you in that window, then that can be a time frame where it's actually worth giving up your positioning for a chance to make a proactive high impact play. So that's just something to keep in mind, and you don't have to do this all the time. It's just based on your cooldowns or based on your opportunity. Now, another important, really big rule about positioning in general is don't give up good positioning for free. If you're in that sweet spot where you're being very effective and you're hard to kill, make an enemy literally force you out or come up with a game plan to force you out so that you don't just give up this really powerful area of the map for essentially no work at all. I think a lot of the times when players are like holding defensively and they just win fight after fight, for some reason they get overeager, aggressive, or antsy, and they feel like they need to change their position so that enemies just don't know what to expect. But the thing is, if you're playing in that really powerful area, it is better for you to just stay there even if the enemy know where you are. If it's automatically more powerful to stay there than just moving somewhere that is much weaker, but you're putting a lot of value in that element of surprise when there's none to be had. And you could get caught out in that transitionary phase and end up throwing the entire team fight, where instead you could have just stayed on that really powerful high ground or wherever you're positioned and really put the burden on the enemy to find a way to deal with you. Now, another thing that you should understand, though, is this is not talking about pushing up when you have an advantage. You should always be adjusting your position based on your advantage. Just like we talked about before, if enemies are getting killed and dying, as a team, you should be pushing up. But here's the important thing. Just because you got 2 or 3 kills doesn't mean you can push in psycho if your team is not also pushing in. Remember, what they are doing and where they are positioned affects you as well. And I see far too many times where a player will see an advantage, and yes, in your mind, your team should be pushing. But if they don't push, then maybe you shouldn't push in as aggressively as well, because you are creating a scenario where you're thinking you're going to roll through the enemy, but you might just be feeding instead, because you are imagining your team's pushing in, but you are not actually seeing your team push in. So this is something that's really important for you to understand. Don't turn a team fight win into a chance for you to feed, because I've seen this way too many times on like a first point hold on something like Eichenwald, where you hold them, fight after fight after fight, and maybe trying to clean up some stragglers you push into aggressively and you get killed. And by the time you make it back, your team are already losing members, they don't back off appropriately, and you basically give up that first point where all you had to do is make sure that you're not pushing in without your team. Now, the last thing that you need to understand is that how safe and aggressive you play can depend on a lot of different factors, and sometimes it is actually appropriate to give up positioning or throw it to the wind for a chance to turn a team fight that you have an overwhelming disadvantage in. For instance, maybe you have to go completely away from natural cover in an unexpected angle as McCree, trying to get multiple kills in the backline because it's like 2v5 or something like that. But in another scenario, maybe you're something like a Genji and you have Nanoblade to win the team fight, and you position way more aggressively than you should, or even relatively safe but not safe enough. You get caught out, forced out, and you can't effectively use that combo that would have won the team fight. Now, because you have a team fight winning ultimate, it is really important that you position even safer than normal so that you don't actually have that risk of getting caught out. And that's something that you should just think about, and applying all these rules together is going to give you a much more effective baseline for how to proceed positionally in the game going forward. But go to the GameLeap website in the links down below for in-depth advanced guides over every single character in the entire game. So if you want to level up your game on any main that you possibly could have, do yourself a favor, go check it out in the links down below. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for coming by. That's all I got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and of course, until next time,